The top stream of the Russian air defense weapon family, the S-400 missile, has a situation where the seller's show is botched in the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. But there are still buyers who cheer after receiving the goods in the highly anticipated conflict between Russia and Ukraine. The news that the Russian Army's S-400 was hit by the Ukrainian Army has often become a hot topic. Not long ago, the live video of the S-400's volley interception of Ukrainian missiles failed, but was blown up instead was spread, which seemed to make the S-400 lose face. Recently, Indian media reported that the Indian Army's S-400 participated in a military exercise for the first time after being equipped and achieved great success. The Indian Army is quite satisfied with this. The same S-400 has received completely different evaluations in Ukraine and India. So what is the reason for this? Some time ago, information on the S-400 transaction between Russia and India released by Ukrainian hacker organizations appeared on the internet. It is reported that this information was obtained by hacking into the mailboxes of Russian military officers. The information lists in detail the hardware quantities included in the S-400 purchased by India, such as command centers, various radars, missile launchers, and even the specific quantities of various types of ammunition. Some media call the disclosure of this information a leak incident. However, from the perspective of the transparency of U.S. foreign arms sales, the relevant information is not a leak. But from this information we can still obtain some key information. First, the S-400 purchased by the Indian Army is in large quantities. According to media reports, India spent $5.4 billion in 2018 to purchase 5 regiments of S-400 from Russia. The disclosed information basically confirms this point. The S-400 regiment in the Russian Army usually contains 2 launch battalions, that is, firepower units. The disclosed information shows that the Indian Army did purchase radar and fire control equipment for 10 firepower units. It can be judged that the Indian Army has become the largest S-400 user outside the Russian Army at present. Secondly, the S-400 purchased by India is fully equipped and has a rich variety of ammunitions, which belongs to the highest configuration of S-400 at the time of purchase. At the same time, when making purchases, India fully and comprehensively considered its own needs and usage scenarios, and did not blindly pursue performance. Taking ammunitions as an example, the supporting ammunitions for the Indian Army's S-400 include the 48 N60 interceptor missile with a range of 200 kilometers. This is the standard equipment after the birth of the S-300 PMU-2. Although its performance is slightly inferior compared to the latest model, in many current combat scenarios, its range and performance can still meet the needs and has high cost performance. The 48 N63 interceptor missile with a range of more than 250 kilometers. This is the latest model of the 48 N6 series launched together with the early S-400. Like the latest 40 N60, it can intercept medium-range ballistic missiles with a speed of up to Mach 14. The 40 N60 interceptor missile with a range of 400 kilometers. It is one of the air defense missiles with the longest range in the world at present. The 4th generation air defense missile 9M96E2, known as the cruise missile killer, among the interceptor missiles purchased by the Indian Army. This missile has the largest quantity, exceeding the total number of other ammunitions. The miniaturization level of 9M96E2 is comparable to that of the West. Its loading capacity is 4 times that of other missiles and is suitable for intercepting large-scale incoming targets. Thus, it can be seen that the Indian Army attaches great importance to countering saturation attacks and low and medium-altitude target defenses. A few days after the so-called leak incident was exposed, Indian media reported that the Indian Army participated in an exercise for the first time after receiving the S-400 and achieved great success. In the exercise, The S-400 shot down 80% of the incoming fighter group, and the remaining targets were also repelled. Obviously, the Indian Army is quite satisfied with the S-400. As an army with considerable strength and a relatively complete system, the Indian Army's evaluation of the S-400 has certain reference significance. Every country usually conducts a systematic acceptance test after receiving purchase weapons. According to reports, similar S-300P MU-2 and S-400 have also undergone comprehensive tests when delivered to customers in Eastern countries and have been recognized by users. It can be said that systems like S-300-400 can successfully complete the delivery test, which has proven their own performance to a certain extent compared with the successful buyer show of the S-400 missile system in the Indian Army. The seller show of the Russian Army's S-400 in the conflict between Russia and Ukraine is rather embarrassing. At least its performance on the internet is not so good looking. Since the outbreak of the conflict between Russia and Ukraine in February 2022, as NATO has continuously provided Ukraine with a large number of long-range precision-guided weapons, in order to tear open the air defense network created by the Russian aerospace forces to obtain better battlefield counterattack opportunities. The Ukrainian army has frequently used NATO weapons to raid Russian Air Force bases and air defense positions, as can be seen from the pictures disclosed on the Ukrainian and Russian networks. Many Air Force bases and air defense positions of the Russian army have indeed been attacked by the Ukrainian army. As the main air defense system of the Russian army, the S-400 naturally often appears in the Ukrainian army's battle reports. So, is it unjust for the S-400 to be bombed? In mid to late May, the Russian Army's S-400 ushered in its darkest moment on the internet. After the S-400 deployed in Donetsk continuously launched 6 missiles for interception, it was still destroyed by the S-made Army tactical missile system of the Ukrainian Army, including at least 1 supporting radar and 3 launch vehicles. The Ukrainian Army's drones completely recorded the complete picture of the Russian Army's S-400 from interception to being destroyed. The on-site pictures taken by the Russian personnel themselves also verified the fact that the S-400 was destroyed. For a while, all kinds of claims that the S-400 is unworthy of its name emerged one after another. So, does the destruction of the S-400 mean that this air defense system has poor performance, and users have bought it at a loss? In fact, it is not necessarily the case. The reasons are as follows. First of all, as mentioned earlier, from the perspective of overseas users' willingness to buy and the usage evaluation after purchase, there is no major problem with the basic performance of the S-400. Taking the destruction of the S-400 by the ATACMS missile in May as an example, on the technical level, the interception of such tactical ballistic missiles is not actually very difficult for air defense systems like the S-400. The large interceptor missiles used in the S-400 S-300P MU series have strong power and fast acceleration. Based on this, if anti-missile optimization is carried out in terms of guidance, FUZE, warhead, etc., there is a great chance of intercepting tactical ballistic missiles. The focus of the S-400 in the field of anti-missile has been raised to medium-range ballistic missiles with higher speeds and ranges than ATACMS missiles. Secondly, the destruction of the S-400 is just an event in the protracted conflict between Russia and Ukraine. In the conflict between Russia and Ukraine, both sides have invested a large number of modern precision-guided weapons in the long-term offensive and defensive. The Russian air defense systems such as the S-400 have become the raid targets of a large number of Western modern precision-guided weapons of the Ukrainian army. There are not many confirmed and seriously damaged results like the destruction of the S-400 in May. According to Russian news, the Russian army has frequently repelled the attacks of Ukrainian precision-guided weapons in places such as Crimea. It can be said that the outside world can see the S-400 being destroyed, but behind it, the moments when the S-400 really plays a role are hard to see. To some extent, the event of the S-400 being destroyed in May can also be regarded as survivor bias. In the conflict between Russia and Ukraine, the American-made Patriot 3 air defense and anti-missile system in the Ukrainian army also has many records of being destroyed. Similarly, we cannot judge that the Patriot 3 missile is completely worthless finally. From a technical perspective, there are two details at the scene of the destruction of the S-400 that are worth noting. First, unlike general aerodynamic targets such as airplanes and cruise missiles, ballistic missiles fly at a higher altitude. When the radar conducts targeted detection, the antenna will obviously tilt back to see the incoming missile, and from the erection angle of the supporting detection radar destroyed at the scene, it can be seen that the S-400 was not in anti-missile detection combat mode at that time. Second, the number of launch vehicles at the S-400 position is relatively small. This may be because in the face of the huge combat area of the conflict between Russia and Ukraine, the Russian army has split the launch units of the S-400 and deployed them to as many places as possible. Although this can make the S-400 cover more areas, it also dilutes the firepower of each fire unit and makes it difficult to deal with the enemy's saturation attack. In addition, dispersed deployment may also affect the information support of the command center to the fire unit, and then affect the combat effectiveness of the S-400 in general. There are many complex factors behind the destruction of the S-400. A single case of battlefield loss cannot fully explain the problem. However, the fact that the S-400 is destroyed is true, and the reasons behind it are also worthy of our attention before discussing the lessons of the destruction of the S-400. It is necessary to first talk about the role of such long-range and large-area air defense systems as the S-400. After the S-400 is destroyed, most discussions focus on whether the S-400 can intercept certain weapons. If it cannot intercept, it is useless, and so on. In fact, the significance of such long-range air defense systems as the S-400 is far more than that. Its significance in deterrence constraint is also equally important, taking the conflict between Russia and Ukraine as an example. Since the Ukrainian army does not have stealth aircraft and supporting means such as perfect air defense suppression, as long as there is a potential threat like the S-400, the actions of the Ukrainian Air Force will inevitably be affected. To avoid the threat, either try to avoid the killing range of the S-400. However, this will limit the use of Western-made airborne weapons of the Ukrainian army due to factors such as range, or penetrate by planning flight routes and reducing flight altitude. But this will greatly compress the combat radius of the aircraft. And here the air threat of the Russian army has not been considered yet, thus reducing combat flexibility. This has a particularly great impact on the light aircraft like the F-16 that the Ukrainian army has just obtained. In short, the existence of long-range air defense systems like the S-400 poses a threat not only in terms of its own interception capability, but also in that such systems will largely restrain the actions of the opponent. If it cannot be taken out, then one can only make one's own actions more complicated. On the contrary, although systems like the S-400 have relatively comprehensive combat capabilities and can adapt to the main combat scenarios at present, but in the actual use process, it should still be comprehensively used with one's own combat forces and make use of its long-range lethality, focusing on large-area combat platforms, interception and deterrence of high-value targets. Nowadays, the Russian army's use of the S-400 is completely contrary to the correct way mentioned above. Since the Russian army is engaged in offensive and defensive operations with the Ukrainian army in a vast area and at the same time has to hold on to Crimea and Russian territory, The number of systems like the S-400 is already extremely inadequate compared to the actual demand. Therefore, as mentioned earlier, the S-400 firepower unit has to be split and used and deployed to the front line. At the front line, the S-400 cannot be effectively protected by its own side. In many cases, it has to perform tasks such as countering rocket launchers, countering precision-guided weapons, and intercepting tactical missiles. However, due to factors such as firepower channels and usage costs, each firepower unit of the S-400 can simultaneously guide 20 missiles to intercept 10 targets. Intercepting weapons that are easy to form saturation attacks is very uneconomical and even powerless. In the face of this situation, the optimal solution is for the S-400 to have a matching and large number of small medium-range interceptor missiles. As mentioned earlier, India's comprehensive procurement of 48 and 60 Series 40 and 60 large interceptor missiles and 9 M90-60 small interceptor missiles is to deal with this situation. The Ukrainian army has repeatedly used American-made army tactical missiles to raid high-value targets of the Russian army. However, although Russia has provided rich choices to customers, the Russian army itself has not adopted them. The S-400 used by the Russian army currently only uses large interceptor missiles. The same 9 M96 series missiles are applied to the independent S-350 air defense system. In the conflict between Russia and Ukraine, the ability of the S-350 seems to have also been confirmed. According to reports, the Russian Army's S-350 once intercepted 12 Ukrainian HIMARS rockets at the same time. Therefore, it is best if systems like the S-400 are used in combination with different types of missiles. Even if not, it should also cooperate with other medium and short-range air defense systems to complement RETI. In 2022, the Hongqi 9B air defense system unveiled by our Army at the Zhuhai Airshow has adopted a mixed grouping mode of large and small interceptor missiles. With stronger battlefield adaptability for the Russian Army, solving the above problems may not be difficult. However, if we want to avoid the recurrence of the S-400 being destroyed in May to a greater extent, just doing these is far from enough. The battlefield early warning and reconnaissance capabilities based on land, sea, air and space are also indispensable. For example, in tactical anti-missile operations, the difficulty of interception is actually secondary. Modern medium and short-range air defense systems such as the Buk M2, M3 and Tor M2 in the Russian Army all have certain interception capabilities and there are successful actual combat cases. But there is an important prerequisite here. That is, the effective early warning capability for tactical ballistic missiles. The same is true for intercepting low-altitude targets such as cruise missiles. For the Russian Army, this is a systematic problem that is difficult to solve in a short time. This problem not only limits the air defense system from exerting its maximum potential, but is also one of the root causes of the Russian Army's difficulties in the conflict between Russia and Ukraine.